There is a connection between the paranormal, UFOs, and the myths of ancient history. The clues are scattered across the landscape from a forbidden past, maybe even in your own backyard. There is a connection between the true nature of our reality, consciousness, and the unexplained. I'm Carl the Crusher. Let's explore the unknown. Welcome back to the Carl Crusher channel. I've got a special guest today, one of my good friends, Chris Lehto, who's a retired F-16 fighter pilot and a UAP analyst, and also researching and exploring theories of physics and reality. I'm excited to talk to you, Chris. We've been having a ton of conversations. We've even gone on a bunch of trips together and worked a lot together. And I've never really had you on my show as a guest. And so I really want to give people an opportunity to get to know you, because over the years, I've really grown to value your opinion. There's been tons of times where I'll get excited about a particular thing or a theory or a situation, and you have the experience and the knowledge a lot of times to keep it grounded and cut right through it and stay logical. And so I really appreciate that, Chris. So thanks for coming on my show this time.
Well, thanks for having me, Carl. Yeah, it's been one of the highlights of getting into this crazy job that we're in is, your friendship. Really enjoy it. So glad to be here.
Appreciate it. Yeah, it's been pretty wild, but I want to take kind of the first part of this and give you an opportunity to tell people about your background and how you got into this. Because I know we could jump into talking about UFOs and the theories and the physics and consciousness, and we could go for hours about that. But I wanted to give you a minute here to kind of talk about what led you into this. So like how you got your credibility, how you got in as a F-16 fighter pilot and what that means. And so tell everybody kind of how you got into all this, and start with your pilot experience. How did you become an F-16 fighter pilot?
I guess I wouldn't say I fell into it, but I kind of fell into it. I didn't grow up. It wasn't my dream to be a fighter pilot. You know, you meet most of the guys that are fighter pilots. It's very difficult to get there. It's very difficult to sign up. You know, I hear a lot of people saying, I wish I did that. You know, as a kid, it was my dream to be a fighter pilot. A lot of people just couldn't do it because they were colorblind. I think 25% of men are actually colorblind, and you can't be colorblind to be a pilot. You can actually have corrective vision, so you can wear glasses, but if you're colorblind, they can't fix that, at least that I know of. So a lot of people couldn't do it. So it is difficult to get into it. Really, I just wanted something different. You know, I grew up in suburban Houston, and I wanted a different lifestyle. Essentially, I didn't want to live in suburbia. I didn't want to just, you know, drive the minivan to soccer practice, etc. Although now I love it. You know, I love watching my kids play sports, and so it actually isn't such a bad life. But at the time, as a young kid, I wanted something different, and I applied for the Air Force Academy. My buddy in high school, he actually went to Annapolis, and he's a Navy fighter pilot. Actually, he's still in, I believe. And so I applied and ended up getting in. And so when you're at the Air Force Academy, it's extremely difficult as well. Basically kick you in the teeth every day, at least the first few years. And they just say, just go ahead and quit, you know, just quit. It's easy. Anybody can quit, you know, you should. And I guess that's just what you say to me to make me keep going forever, apparently, because it's like, just quit. And I'm like, oh, you know, I'll show you who's going to quit. So I didn't quit and made it. And basically anyone from the Air Force Academy, as long as you have the medical clearances, you get first dibs to go to pilot training. And so I went to pilot training in Pensacola. I went to Navy pilot training, actually. And again, it's difficult to go fighter track. Actually, it's highly competitive, very difficult. Pilot training is a very difficult. It's really a 2-year-long training course. A lot of hazing, especially in the Air Force version. The Navy treats you more like an adult, but the Air Force version is just straight haze. It's a hazing course, essentially. It's very difficult, put you under a lot of pressure, a lot of stress. And I think just I grew up playing sports, and I grew up playing video games, and I was good at math and science, etc. And so all that stuff kind of combined. And I think also it wasn't my dream, growing up. So I think if it's not your dream, I had less pressure on myself, so I could perform under pressure. It wasn't like the world would end if I failed out of pilot training, but for a lot of guys, it really was their dream. And so I was able to excel at pilot training, and I got to pick the fighter. And so I picked F-16s, and I was lucky enough to get an F-16. And so traveled mainly around the world. One of the great benefits I thought of being a U.S. fighter pilot is that we have bases all around the world, right? For good or bad, depending on your viewpoint. But I was able to live in really amazing places. My first assignment was to South Korea. So I lived there for a year, really interesting. Couldn't bring family, so I couldn't bring my wife or fiance at the time. But then right after a year in South Korea, we went to Italy. And so lived in, beautiful northern Italy, right near Venice, Aviano Air Base, for 2.5 years. It was just amazing. And then I got to live in Alaska, lived in North Alaska, Fairbanks. How many people get to live in a place like that for 4 years? Actually called North Pole is where we lived. And then I was even going to get out after that. I was going to leave because it's extremely difficult lifestyle. It's more like you're on a sports team, except there's no crowds really watching, so there is high pressure. It's basically like you're on a competitive team, essentially. Very long hours every day, at least 12 hours. You're working on the weekends, etc. High stress, high pressure. And so I was going to get out, and then they offered me to go to Turkey. So to learn Turkish, I actually went to DLI, which is in Monterey, California, and they taught me Turkish, paid me really to go to school, just 8 hours a day, and then 2 hours of homework was like nothing compared to a normal fighter squadron. So it was like a vacation. And then went to Turkey and lived in Turkey for 2.5 years, and then came back, went to Arizona, lived there for a couple of years, and then was able to live in Spain. My final tour, I actually commanded a little detachment at Tactical Leadership Program. And so I was training basically NATO fighter pilots in an amazing program. So fantastic career all around the world, and I really enjoyed it.
It's amazing. So explain a little bit about the F-16. So you said you kind of picked that track, or is it something that the Air Force kind of is testing you along the way to see what your aptitude is, and you're also kind of guiding that and choosing what you want to sign up for? And then talk about like the F-16, because that's if I'm not mistaken, that's a single engine, right? And that's like a fighter. So you're going head to head against other jets. You're not targeting ground units and things like that necessarily. So
both, actually. So that's why I picked it. I picked the F-16. You kind of mentioned two things there. The first is it's single seat. And so there are some planes like the F-15 Strike Eagle, or any bomber, any cargo, you have another person in the plane with you. And so for good or bad, as I got later in my career, I think I would want actually another person helping. It makes your squadron a lot bigger. There's a lot of other duties just besides the actual flying part, that you see in the movies. Like all the other jobs and bureaucratic positions need to be taken care of, like the schedulers and everything else. So actually having 2 people for every plane makes all of that a lot easier. So the F-15E, that's a Strike Eagle, they have a person in the back seat, right? But I wanted a single seat fighter at the time. The other thing is the F-16 is multi-role. So you have the F-15C, which is only air to air, and you had the A-10, which is only air to ground. Those are both single seat fighters as well. The F-16 now is multi-role, so it does both. And so they say the F-16 is jack of all trades and master of none. But for me, that was exciting because I didn't know enough. Did I want air to air? Did I want only air to ground? Why not do both? Why not do multi-role? Looking back, I see that that's actually more difficult. It's really hard to stay proficient in all the different missions that the F-16 has, especially single seat, right? So F-15E, again, they have 2 people to kind of help share the load. but the F-16, yeah, and they and like standard fighter pilots, right? They're good at everything and think they're good at everything, so they'll take on all the missions, you know. So they do all of it, you know, close air support, air to air, you know, air to ground interdiction, combat search and rescue, the SEAD, suppression of enemy air defenses. So that is exciting. So the F-16 is like your infantry fighter. It's like your grunt, you know, the dude that you're just going to send out there with the machine gun who can shoot up, you know, shoot at stuff up in the air, shoot at stuff on the ground. But if you're going straight against an air-to-air fighter, right? Like the F-15C pilots, like we always made fun of them, you know, as you do in a fighter community. But in air-to-air, they were amazing, you know. So they would probably wipe the deck with F-16. You know, I hate to say that to the F-16 players out there, but that's all they do. They just focus on it, you know, air-to-air fighting. That's all they do. But also they don't do anything in all of the wars we fought, right? The F-15C pretty much did nothing. Okay, they would fly over there and talk it up. But if the air-to-air fighters, if they're shooting, you know, if they're shooting missiles and such, you're in a really bad war. You know, we don't want America or any of our countries to be in an air-to-air fighting war, because that's not going to be good. So they did nothing the past 20 something years, right? Whereas the A-10 pilots and the F-16 pilots were fighting all the time. So they're always dropping bombs, doing close air support, and again, always difficult missions. So that's really how it all came down to it. There's more F-16s. We've sold way more F-16s than any other plane around the world. So that's why I was able to go to Turkey, because Turkey, they have F-16s along with like 29 or 30 other countries. You know, so it's probably our largest export military program, you know, at least that I know about, is the F-16. So a lot of other countries have them. It's like the grunt fighter.
It's kind of like the AK-47 of the Air Force, right? It's the general purpose. A lot of different militaries utilize it for multi-purpose.
It's really small. It's like a motorcycle when you look at fighters. Like if you have an F-16 up next to an F-15, it's half the size, literally half the size. So they're really hard to see, right? They're really small, which is good. Like in a war, you really want to be hard to see in a big fight. And so they're really difficult to see. Small radar cross section, but then also they don't carry as many weapons, right? So you're not going to have the big giant guns. You can't carry as many missiles. You can't carry as much fuel. You can't fly as high as the F-15, right? The F-15 is this giant monster with two big jet engines. It has basically the same engine as the F-16, but two of them. So it can fly much higher. It has a giant radar. But the F-15 guys, the C model guys, they all also have like testicular cancer. Okay, they all have a lot of issues because they have this giant radar. So it's good. I'm not as worried about cancer as those guys are. Yeah. So a lot of things they don't tell you about hemorrhoids and testicular cancer, right? They don't mention that when you're signing up, or back problems when you're signing up in pilot training.
Wow. No, I wouldn't even think about that.
Concussions as well. There's big issues with concussions due to the high Gs. I saw that they're finding kind of the same effects that pro football players have.
Really?
Yeah, from just your repeated G forces, because it's a G monster, man. The F-16 takes the highest Gs, up to 9 Gs in the air-to-air version. And this is the aggressor. So this is actually, I was in the plane that took this photo, actually. It was really scary.
Oh, wow.
It's a 1-to-1 camera angle. So the guy, this professional photographer, it's a 1-to-1. So like that's how close. If you were there in real person,
that's not zoomed in. So you're actually that close.
Yeah.
Oh Jesus!
Dude. Which is not normal. Like this is a normal formation what they're flying, but the plane I'm in was not a normal formation. So I'm like flying like this. Like, man, this does not feel comfortable. Like with these two planes right behind me. But that's the air-to-air version. If you're doing air-to-air fighting in the F-16. You can pull up to 9 Gs, and that's the max. It hurts, but you can turn really well. So yeah, it was an amazing career. I enjoyed it. People ask, do you miss it? I guess I missed the flying part, but I've done over 1,000 missions. I've done so many missions. It's like, how many times do you need to do something before you don't need to do it anymore? I guess.
Yeah.
But I do definitely miss aspects of it, like the winning part, really when it doesn't matter how much someone thinks, how good they think they are, right? If you can beat them in a fight, like you won, like you did it, you won. So I do miss that, and the team aspect is really interesting. So I do miss that part. I don't miss all the other BS, the bureaucracy. It's so painful. The military just got so freaking painful.
Hmm. Did you do any pilot training or any time at Nellis or Area 51, or can you talk about any of that?
Well, so this is the aggressors. They do the flying in Red Flag, but I was in Alaska, so I stood up the Alaska aggressors. But there's another aggressor squadron at Nellis Air Force Base, and they do all of the red air, the op force flying for Nellis, for the weapons school. That's where the Air Force Top Gun is. It's actually a 6-month program. It's at Nellis, and so the 64th aggressors, they fly there all the time. So I knew a bunch of those people, and I flew one Red Flag as a Blue Air, of course, once, and then I flew just one as an aggressor. So I flew around the container. And it's right in the middle of the airspace, the Red Flag training airspace, and you call it the container, and everybody knows about it. You really try to stay away from it as much as you can. But if there once in a while there was an emergency, and I think some Germans had to land there, and then they're immediately, they're escorted off the base. I don't even know what they do with the planes. I don't know how they get the planes out of there. But then you're sent back home. They send them back to their home countries. So I've had, ancillary run-ins with it.
Fascinating. So did you run any combat missions? You said you ran several missions. Did you go to any combat spaces or run any wartime stuff?
In 2005 and 6, when I was in Aviano, my first assignment or second assignment, I went to Iraq. We flew out of Balad Air Base. It's this giant base right north of Baghdad. And so I was there for almost 6 months doing close air support. And so basically running all these missions, many of them boring, but many of them interesting. I actually do have a manuscript draft book that I was just thinking now I finally need to just, get off my butt and finish it. But I've written all the first draft. Now I just need to do a final second over and then publish it. But yeah, very interesting missions. Worked with sometimes special forces, which was awesome. When I think about, the missions they did, which was at the time, you're just like, okay, yeah, this is normal, I guess. But, we had missions where guys like dove in, like you see in the movies, like the Halo jumps, high altitude, low opening jumps, like some special forces team out into some random village out in the middle of Western Iraq, and then me and the flight lead were basically reconning this random village, while these guys like sneak up at night with snipers and stuff. And the whole time I was just thinking like, this is so stupid, like I was like, just drive up there, dude. Just drive a truck up there. And so, yeah. Other times, there was some exfil missions. Basically, we had some high value targets that they captured some, big wig that was on some list, and then escort the helicopters as they're like loading them on the helicopters and flying them out of there. Had a bunch of missions. My first mission was insane. It's in the book. But basically, I was on night alert. My first night there, I wasn't supposed to be flying, and my buddy's like, "Hey, man, you want to sit alert with me?" And alert is where the two jets are like ready to go, and then they launch within less than 5 minutes. And so you're wearing all the gear, the plane's ready to go. And I was like, yeah, sure, because he said basically they never launch. He's like, we never launch. We haven't launched in like a month. And we're just there on call. So
you're basically on call, but you're usually doesn't get called.
It's called alert. Basically, it's like the alarm goes off, you run out the door, jump in the plane, and then you take off. So you can get to anywhere in Iraq in less than 10 minutes, I believe. And yeah, and he's like, I just landed, and I was helping the other squadron out. I'm like in the chow hall, and my buddy Bonzai comes up to me. He's like, "Hey man, can you sit alert tonight?" I was like, "Tonight?" Because you're supposed to study all these papers. We're supposed to read everything. I read everything, but I was like, didn't like fully study everything. Because I had another 2 days. Right when we get there, we have 2 days downtime, so I can study. I can learn the real details that I need to focus on. And He's like, yeah, but it'll be good. Don't worry. I can teach you everything. I'll tell you everything during this 12-hour shift. And it was a great opportunity for me because I was like, I can learn everything I need to know from this guy. He was a really good pilot. He's a general now. Amazing pilot. My friend, he was my roommate, basically in pilot training. And so it was a great opportunity. And I was like, okay, yeah, excellent. He says they never launch,
Right.
And as soon as I go take a nap, whatever, it's at night. We show up early. We get everything there early so that we'll have extra time, to get ready. And he's like showing me around. He's like, yeah, okay, so here's where our night vision goggles are. This is where we put them over here. And then the commander runs and he's like, launch.
Oh, no.
And I was like, what? And they're like, get in the car. And so they just jump in the truck, I end up launching nothing strapped in. It's the only time I've taken off in a fighter and I wasn't strapped in.
You weren't buckled?
No.
So you took off in the jet without your seatbelt on
at night with nothing on, not not hooked into anything. Because he was launching. I didn't know where he was going. It was amazing. So I just launched with him and I'm basically climbing straight up at night and I'm strapping in the ejection seats. You're not supposed to do that. And then we get to this house. They're basically raiding a house. And I'm covering the back of the house, making sure anybody that runs out the back, we track them, or if anyone's showing up with extra weapons or guns or extra support or whatever. And then our guys roll up to the front of the house. Everybody starts shooting, and they jump into the building. And then if a minute or two later, they pop basically a night smoke on the top. And so the building's clear or whatever. And then they like run out of there, and we're like tracking this. I'm tracking this Humvee across the middle of Baghdad at night. There's lights everywhere, I end up losing them after a while just because never done that before. We'd never done that in training or anything. It was just like, welcome to combat. It was totally different from any of the training that I'd done up to that point,
You don't even know where the goggles go or where you're supposed to put your boots or anything. Next thing you know, you're like out deployed without your seatbelts on. That's wild, man.
I was over Baghdad within 3 minutes. When that guy ran in and said, go, 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 I was literally over Baghdad, like upside down at night, strapping into my ejection seat. Less than 5 minutes. It was less than 5 minutes.
Wow. That's amazing.
So I learned trial by fire.
It'll be exciting when your book comes out. You definitely got to get that finished. So, go ahead.
No, that's it. Yeah.
I was gonna ask you then, through all your time then, so now you're really focused on UFOs and UAPs and kind of analyzing all the news and stuff coming out with that. Where did that come from? Have you had any sightings or experiences or what spawned that interest in you as a pilot?
I saw nothing in the Air Force. It's more what changed. After I left the Air Force, I decided to be a YouTuber. We loved Europe, so I stayed in Europe, ended up moving to Portugal. And then it was more, I couldn't believe how wrong my assumptions could be. Basically I grew up, scientist, essentially. I got a material science degree from Air Force Academy. I was even going to be a scientist. And then I just saw how boring it was. Like, I'm sorry for the scientists out there, but it was like real on the ground science just seemed extremely boring. In the labs, just watching machines do run after run after run, just didn't seem that exciting to me. So I ended up, going to pilot training. But I love science, and I on the side I just continued to always read about physics. I loved nature of reality, what the cosmos is about. I was hardcore atheist basically. So my whole off on the side hobby investigation, I read all the religious textbooks, basically the religious textbooks. I read all the religious books. I read Buddhism, all your Indian stuff, the Quran, Bibles, obviously. And so I've just been very interested in the nature of reality and science. And I believed mainstream science. I guess that's what kind of blew me away is when I just started looking at the UAP topic, just like, oh, okay, well, it's ridiculous. It fell into my lap because it was the gimbal videos and it was Go Fast and FLIR, right? These are all directly fighter pilot videos. You know, I've been looking at that stuff for 20 years.
Dude, that is a fucking drone, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. That is the LNS, dude. Well, if there's like... Look at that thing! It's rotating. Nickel 6-1 Tango Logic, over. Oh, got it! Woohoo! Roger, there's troubleshooting. Did you box moving target? 602. No, I took an auto track. Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, dude. Wow, look at it fly!
You know, frame by frame, analyzing this stuff. And so when I saw like the gimbal video, like I'm sure you just see kind of black and white, like a thing turning or rotating or whatever. But no, I see like, what the hell is that? You know, that's what I couldn't believe. And so I was like, well, I'll just look at it. You know, it's got to be something explainable or mundane or something. And it wasn't, you know, it really wasn't. Like, especially the gimbal. Like, you can argue even FLIR, although it literally looks like a Tic Tac, you know, like, but how it moves. Okay, when accelerated, I found that actually the acceleration could have been from the camera braking lock. But then you look at it in optical view and it looks literally like a Tic Tac. I mean, it's a cylinder-shaped object. That doesn't make sense. But maybe you could explain it, you know. And then Go Fast, yeah, it's very interesting. But you could possibly explain it, right? It could be the parallax effect. It could be maybe it's possible it's a balloon. That's definitely believable, you know. But like gimbal, there is no freaking explanation for gimbal. I don't care what anybody says. Like, yes, it is a glare, right? It does rotate, and it is the pod. So Mick West is correct. Like all that stuff, like it's rotating. He's correct. I mean, it is. Like you can track it to the pod's rotation. But what the hell is it that's making the glare? That's the thing. It's like they're like doing this crazy psyop distract, you know. And I see people get in arguments with Mick West, like it's not a glare, you know. And he's like, it is a glare, and I'm like, they're just focusing on the wrong thing. Like, it is a glare, great, but what is making a glare? Because it's turning, right? So it's in a turning engagement, and we did that all the time as fighter pilots. You have to draw it up in pilot training. And you have to use simulator systems. I was in charge of simulator contract for Lockheed Martin Aero.
Oh,
which is interesting. We can talk about that later. But so the gimbal, it's within 7 miles. So basically, you can track it because we know the plane. You know all the plane, the plane that's taking the video. We know it's in a turn. We know the exact bank angle. We know the airspeed. We know the altitude. So from that, you can determine exactly how it's turning. Right, based on normal air conditions, the standard temperatures and stuff at that altitude. So we know exactly the camera plane, right? We know its track, and we know very accurately as well where the pod is exactly pointing, right? Because it's a targeting pod, so it's very good at angle resolution, and so we know the gimbal object is less than 7 miles away. And so if it's less than 7 miles away and it's at 25,000 feet. Then we know it's going 250 knots, and nothing can do that. There's nothing that size can do that we know about. And there's no like jet plume. You don't see any like fire coming out of the back. It's an infrared pod. It's liquid cooled. It's military grade medium IR pod. You should see something there. We shouldn't see this glare, right? We shouldn't see something glaring. And Mick West's whole argument is that it's something far away. And that would work, actually. That would work, that argument, if it wasn't turning, right? If it wasn't turning, you could say, okay, something far away. But if it's something far away now, it has to be going like Mach 6. It would have to be going so fast, right? Because as you're turning really far away.
If it's farther away, then the speed has to exponentially increase and for it to make sense. So then the G-forces and the speed and all that doesn't suddenly falls apart. So which is it? Wow, I never thought of that.
So no, gimbal is a bona fide, like, does not make any freaking sense. I don't care if you're Mick West. Mick West is correct. It is a glare. Great. Now what the fuck is it? That's the better question. Nothing explains it. So gimbal, when I looked at the gimbal, I was like, it blew my mind. And then I listened to David Fravor. I listened to David Fravor first, actually. That blew my mind because he's like your standard nerdy, super sciencey, badass fighter pilot. Right? He's like your normal commander fighter pilot guy. You know, he wears a hat. You know, it'll say like his squadron that he was in. You know, he'll wear you know, probably nerdy shorts and nerdy shoes, but he knows everything about killing other things and people with airplanes, like down to a T, you know, to a scary T.
Yeah.
And he's the guy I knew. I didn't know him when I was in the military, but I knew many people just like him. Exactly. And I trusted him. And so when he talks about how he talked about it, how he relayed the information, it was basically like I was there.
It's led to an interest from our elected officials who are not focused on little green men, but figuring out where these craft are, where they from, the technology they possess, how do they operate. It also led to the Whistleblower Protection Act and the NDAA. There are multiple witnesses coming forward to say that have firsthand knowledge, and Mr. Grush just covered that. What concerns me is that there's no oversight from our elected officials on anything associated with our government processing or working on craft. Believe it not from this world. This issue is not a full public disclosure that could undermine national security, but it is about ensuring that our system of checks and balances works across all work done in the government using taxpayer funds. Relative to government programs, even unacknowledged WAVE programs have some level of oversight by the appropriate committee members in the House and Senate. And this work that is said to be occurring from whistleblower testimonies should not be exempt. In closing, I would like to say that the Tic Tac object we engaged in 2004 was far superior to anything that we had on time, have today, or are looking to develop in the next 10 years. If we in fact have programs that possess this technology, it needs to have oversight from those people that the citizens of this great country elected in office to represent what is best for the United States and best for the citizens. I thank you for your time. Thank you very much.
On November 14th, 2004, Commander David Fravor and his wingman pilot took off from the USS Nimitz, which was on maneuver south of San Diego.
I was the commanding officer of Strike Fighter Squadron 4-1, the Black Aces. We're flying brand new Super Hornets. It was an air defense exercise, 2 good guys against 2 bad guys. Probably 70 miles, 60 miles off the coast in the gap between San Diego and Ensenada.
Suddenly, the pilots are contacted by radar operators on the Princeton.
The Princeton control comes up and says, we're going to suspend training. We have real-world tasking.
The pilots are revectored to a new destination, but aren't told why.
So we start heading off to the west. The other airplane is on my left-hand side.
I was the junior pilot trying to keep up with the senior pilot in the lead aircraft.
We're looking, we don't see anything on our radars at all. And we're talking to each other trying to figure this out.
The Princeton's Aegis Spy-1 radar system is powerful enough to track an object as small as a baseball at an altitude of 80,000 feet, but the jets are flying blind.
We tried to see what was out there, which is difficult when you know what you're looking for. It's even harder when you don't know what you're looking for.
So it goes down 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, gets all the way down. They get to a point where they can't separate us from the blimp. They call it merge plot, which means you're in the same space as whatever you're looking for, and you got to start looking outside because the radar can't help you anymore.
Then far below in the water, they see what looks like a plane crash or a submerging submarine. But the weapons officer in the rear seat of Fravor's jet spots something else.
I hear, hey, Skipper, do you see? And as he's saying that, I notice the Tic Tac. It's white. It has no wings. It has no rotors. I go, holy, what is that? And he goes, I don't know.
According to this leaked summary of the incident, contact was made here, 30 miles off the coast, 70 miles south of the US-Mexico border. At first, the strange craft stays close to the surface, moving unlike anything the pilots had ever seen.
This thing would go instantaneous from one way to another, similar to if you threw a ping pong ball against a wall. And we start to kind of orbit, because now we're going to watch this thing. We start a right-hand turn, and we're going from a clock code. The object is in the middle of the clock, and we're at 6 o'clock, and we're driving around the circle. So we get to about 9 o'clock, and it's just still doing its little erratic thing, kind of moving around this disturbance in the water. And I go, hey, I'm going to go check it out. I'm going to go down there. As we're coming down nice and easy, we get to about the 12 o'clock position, and all of a sudden it goes, whoop, and it kind of turns, and now it's mirroring us, and it starts coming up. We're like, okay, now it knows we're here.
It seemed to be aware, and it seems to recognize him.
It goes from basically just almost a hover into a pretty aggressive climb up to our altitude. So there's a bit of fear because now you're out there dealing with something that you have no idea what it is. It's actually reacting to what we're doing. I'm kind of pulling nose, to where he's going to be, and he's coming up. He just rapidly accelerates beyond anything that I've ever seen. Crosses my nose, and it's gone. And I'm like, whoa.
The Tic Tac appears to have vanished. But as the jets streak towards a prearranged rendezvous location, known as the cap point, the radio chatter becomes frantic.
The controller from the Princeton comes up right as we're doing all this and says, hey, sir, you're not going to believe this. He goes, but that thing is at your cap point.
According to Fravor, the Tic Tac accelerated from a standing position and flew approximately 60 miles in under a minute, as fast as 3,700 miles an hour. How did the Tic Tac know the pilot's cap point? And how did it accelerate so quickly?
You got something that can accelerate and disappear and then show up 60 miles away. Kind of in awe a little bit because you go, whoa, we don't have that. And I'm talking, we're flying one of the premier airplanes on the planet. What was this? There was a capability out there. Don't know where it's from. Not saying it's from outer space, but not saying it's from here either.
Back on the Nimitz, the pilots tell the rest of the squadron what just happened.
The next crew is getting ready. So we're talking to them about this, and they're like, you got to be kidding.
They took us seriously, and the Wizzo, the guy in the back seat, said, I'm going to go find it.
The next jet to launch had a targeting pod with an infrared sensor and camera.
It jammed the radar, but he got a lock on it, and that's the video that you see. That doesn't weird you out. I don't know what does.
Dude, that is a fucking drone, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. That is the LNS, dude. Well, if there's like... Look at that thing! It's rotating.
So I've never seen any crazy UAPs in person. I've had crazy experience since then, but I've never seen anything, from a plane like David Fravor has. But when he relayed the Tic Tac, it was like I was there. So it really that blew my mind. And then when I analyzed gimbal, I was like, man, holy shit, something really is going on. And all the stuff I've been told, everything up until now, I think is not correct. There's some really big fundamental assumptions that have been missing, been totally wrong. And it basically just rocked my world. And so now I don't even want to be like a UFO influencer or analyzer or whatever. It was never my dream. But I can't help it because it's like something is going on. Something is there. I don't have another option, I guess. So, but yeah, I do enjoy it.
So you had so you're 18 years as a pilot, you saw the gimbal footage and you're able to actually see the screen and see the data. Whereas most people look at that, we don't even know how to read the black and white image, if it's thermal or how that all works. Like the average person doesn't understand it, but you see the whole readout and the way this thing is moving. You don't see the propulsion. You don't see any props. You're able to do the math. And you said you even did simulation work with Lockheed. So you're doing all the trigonometry on this and it's not adding up. And then the whistleblowers start coming forward about the Tic Tac and you're like, wait a second.
Yeah.
So this isn't making any sense. So did you start by just trying to pick that all apart, sort of like Mick West, to see what was really going on and realize that you couldn't? Or
it was But yeah, my buddy told me about Mick West. Actually, I'd never heard of him. And I basically, we were talking at the bar just with a local buddy here, and I said, "Yeah, it's crazy, right? That gimbal video." And he's like, "Oh yeah, no, it's been debunked. It's not real." And I was like, "What? Like who debunked it? That's amazing. What is it? I couldn't believe it." And he's like, "Oh, this guy Mick West. He debunked it. Said it's not true. Did all this analysis video on it." I was like, "Oh, okay, I got to check it out." So I went and watched. I searched for Mick West, etc., and I listened to all the things he was saying. It was on CNN. He's on Fox News. He's on all these big videos, and I just got like madder and madder each time because I was like, "This is bullshit. This is not correct." Yeah, it's not correct. Like, how could we not tell it's not a duck? Basically, he was saying it's probably a geese. That's what it was. And I was like, how could we kill anything if we just locked on to geese? I've never locked on to a geese, in 20 years. I was never like, oh, what's that over there? Is that a fighter or is that a geese?
Right.
So it just blew me away. So I released like kind of an obscene video, not obscene, but I was definitely a more offensive video because no one watched my videos. I didn't expect anyone to actually watch it. And then that video went viral or relatively viral. And so then I had a lot of people watching my videos and wanting more analysis like that. So I was like, okay, well, I'll do another analysis video. And so it just kept announcing. And then I ended up getting in like this online debate with Mick West because then he saw my videos or someone shared my videos with him. And so he would make a video and then I would make a counter video. And so we were doing like counter video. And actually, I'd recommend anybody to go watch that series. There's a series where he makes a video, I make a video, he makes a video, and I answer his claims. It was like an online debate. Really interesting because he has a really smart team. This guy Flarkey that works for him, or Metabunk, he has a team of really smart analysts, actually, who have previous experience, I'm sure. And so they do come up with good ideas. So I think it's definitely important what he does to show the arguments, to look at it from all sides, for sure.
I agree.
And he actually saves me a lot of time, actually. If I see a new big video comes up or something, I'll look at it, I'll kind of get my first thoughts, and then I'll go to Metabunk, actually. So I'll go to his website because I know I'll get the best debunking answer. What do the debunkers say from an actual scientific angle? What is their best argument? And so I'll watch that, and then from there, I know he's already done a lot of the work, essentially, to debunk, because most of the stuff is going to be bunk, right? Most of the stuff is not going to be your alien videos.
Right.
So that's basically how I ended up getting into the analysis and interacting with Mick West. So it was basically Mick West that got me into this, essentially.
Yeah, so because you're like, he's not a pilot. He's never been up there. He's analyzing this footage and doesn't even know how to analyze it quite all the way. I felt the same way. Like he would start to comment about Skinwalker Ranch and different levels of the phenomena and UAP interaction and all that. And I'm like, that's always my argument. I'm like, you've never been. I'm like, you're literally writing blogs about this stuff and you've never even been. You've never done it yourself or whatever. But you're right. There is a place where it's definitely needed. That critical thinking and the skepticism it's important. It definitely is to weed through all of this. But Chris, how did you get from sitting online and making videos back and forth with Mick West to up by Skinwalker Ranch, where the first time we actually met in person, we were launching a weather balloon with sensors on it with Dr. Jim Segala. I still have never even asked you how you wound up there and involved in that. What was that all about?
Yeah, basically, I couldn't believe that it would be possible, but unfortunately, the more I looked, the more evidence I found that it was possible. Not only that it was possible that you could have this giant, suppressed science, that you could have suppressed information for so many years. Not only that did I find that it was possible, but it became the most probable explanation, and I guess people don't consider that. You hear that a lot, like Occam's razor. Occam's razor is actually the final solution that has the least number of assumptions or the least amount of assumptions, right? So if you use Occam's razor to all the crazy things we see, the UAP phenomena, I mean, just take one assumption that there are aliens that are here. Right? I mean, that's the least number of assumptions. That if you look at what if the conspiracies are true, and then you say what would that look like today? I kept seeing that that's the answer. That was the unfortunate part. Is the deeper I looked with an open mind, meaning if anything is possible, what's the most likely scenario that's going on? Is I found that actually was the case, that it was true that there are aliens or extraterrestrial, some form of non-human intelligence that is here, that has been interacting with us for at least till the 40s, and possibly many thousands of years. That was not only possible but more likely than the other answer, right? That we're totally alone, and that all of these people are making this stuff up, right? All of these people I respect and met with in person, credible people. Who do I believe more? Do I believe the people that are telling me this with nothing to gain, or government entities with very much to gain? So it really led to that point where I think this could actually be probable. And in that instance, what we need is to find the real truth, right? The truth data, they were calling it when I left the Air Force, truth data. So how do you get that? Is through decentralized viewpoints, decentralized perspectives, right? Because it's information. Information is the weakest form of power, right? Because the problem with information is it's extremely copyable and spreadable, right? Once it gets out, it will immediately render your systems vulnerable. I mean, that's why they keep our information so secret, right? That's why we have these compartmented programs. That's why you have these, intense security protocols with like Faraday cages, and, you can't bring any phones anywhere. Is once that information gets out, right, it can make entire multi-billion-dollar systems totally useless or vulnerable. So it's very powerful, but also the weakest, right? Because actually having like an F-22 fighter, right, or having an F-16 fighter is really powerful, right? In that case, but just if the information that can make that fighter completely useless, it's free essentially. So that's so powerful. So information, how it can be kept secret is you need it centralized, right? You need it in really specific locations. So you need a centralized body, you need centralized control, you need gatekeepers. And what's the opposite to that is decentralization, right? Decentralized science. So if you had many people around the world actually looking into this from different angles, if you had people all around the world looking into the science, the suppressed science that you mentioned, or that I look into. Now, how can you stop, a whole, how do you stop 1 million bees? You can't. That's why drones are so powerful, right? Because you could have one F-35, which is amazing, but what if you have 1,000 drones, that each cost like $100? Like, what's more powerful? I think your 1,000 drones that cost $100 is more powerful than one F-35 fighter. Why? Because it's decentralized. I learned that in Iraq too. We had huge technological superiority against the insurgency, right? But they have decentralization, right? All they needed to do was cause damage through improvised explosive devices, which are cheap explosives that they could make and put anywhere, essentially. They didn't have to coordinate with each other. They didn't have to set up, checkpoints, etc. You just had like decentralized fighters. So anyone could just set up a little explosive device and fight, bomb an American anywhere in Iraq. It's decentralized warfare, and we couldn't fight it. Like we can't fight it. Like, how do you find all these improvised explosive devices? You have to shut down the whole country, essentially. And that's why it's so hard to win against an insurgency. It's a decentralized enemy. You're fighting against a ghost, essentially. So that's why I pushed for that, was to create UAP Society. The idea is a decentralized science entity. and we launched the balloon to launch UAP Society as a company. Since then, we have a Discord. And as far as the science angle, it's really hard to manage a decentralized science organization, is what I've learned. But I think what we're doing is decentralized investigation right now. So on YouTube, talking live to you, you're doing your MooPass sensor setups. You're going out and looking into hardcore into the consciousness aspect of this. I'm analyzing videos. We're both publishing. I watch your videos. You watch my videos. I share your stuff, and then we talk behind the scenes. I think this is the decentralized investigation that I wanted. I hope we can just expand it and make it more effective.
How did you meet Dr. Segala? Because he is the reason I'm a part of this whole MooPass project, and I met him because of you. We had made friends online, and then how did you make friends with Dr. Segala and then wind up there between Skinwalker and Blind Frog Ranch? Because that was the whole incident.
I met him there too. Yeah, I met him there. I think when I met you, or
was it a convention? Was it it was a?
Yeah, it was the UFO conference in Vernal.
That's right. We held a UFO disclosure symposium or something. It was either that one or Phenomicon, right?
It wasn't Phenomicon. No, it was the UFO disclosure in Vernal.
That's right.
That was the only one I've really ever been to. A crazy experience in itself. Blind Frog Ranch, basically running it. That was, very interesting. I learned a lot about the whole UFO community, but met some amazing people.
But that was your first instance then when you were like, okay, we're going to form a decentralized movement into exploring the UAP topic. And not only that, applying science to it, capturing real data so that we can have a real citizen effort to push back against Mick West and also the government secrecy. So,
Yep.
That's the whole thing. It's if we go get the evidence ourselves, if we go out and actually capture the 5 Sigma scientific data on our own independently with video evidence and, a bunch of journal logs and tons of proof, then that's something substantial that, critics would have to crawl through, to try and sort all of that out and those experiences. But that really did all start with launching a weather balloon with sensors with Jim Segala up there out of the parking lot, right? That's so amazing that even happened and all the places that we've been. So let's talk about that. After we launched that balloon, you formed the UAP Society. And then since then, we've been on several different actual field expeditions to apply our theories. So talk about some of your favorites. I want to hear from your perspective what that all's been like, going to Skinwalker and some of the places that you've been.
So Mount Wilson, right? We just when you were on my channel last week, I showed a video from when we were in the Mount Wilson saloon there. We were doing the single slit diffraction experiment where you shine a laser across a guitar string and it can make actually the interference pattern, that proves that light is a wave. I really enjoyed that, as well as we did, if you remember, the telephone experiments in the Mount Wilson bar. We did that a few times, and we got more than 25% of hits, if I remember correctly, that Rupert Sheldrake had done that. I didn't even know Rupert Sheldrake had done all those experiments. I thought I was a genius coming up with this telephone experiment,
Yeah.
And of course,
describe that experiment really quick for everybody so they know what it's talking about. It's a telepathy experiment that we did.
It's pretty fun. It's fun actually. If you get to a party with people well, and you get say you get 5 people together. So what you do is you put one person in the other room, right? And then you get the other 3 or 4 people, how many you can get together. And now what they're going to do is try and they'll do a random number generator. So the separated people, right? This person alone, you have your other 4 people, they run a random number generator to pick one of them. All right. So let's say it picks Bill. Okay. So then you say, okay, we're ready. And now Bill is going to text to the person that's alone. Let's say Jill, right? And you give Jill a few seconds to say, okay, who's going to text you? Who's going to text you? Because I'm sure we've all had that instance where you think of someone you haven't thought of in a long time, or maybe a family member, or you're just thinking of your family member, and then you pick up, the phone rings and it's them, and you're like, how is that possible? I was just thinking about you, or I was just thinking about where your ears burning. So that's what we're testing, right? And so you basically run a random number generator, pick one of these 4 people, and then this person tries to guess, using mental telepathy or whatever it is, tries to guess who's going to call. And so this is I call it the telephone experiment. But little did I know, Rupert Sheldrake has been doing this for years. He did it decades ago. And he actually found that it was much higher than 25%. If the people knew each other, I think it was over 50% they were guessing, or at least down to like 36%. So much higher than chance. So higher than 20, it should be a 25% chance, right? If you have 4 people, if they just guess randomly. So if you do 30 experiments, which is a lot to do, actually, that's what I found, is doing 30 of those, that would give you a statistical analysis capability, right? If you have more than 30 hits, now you can actually do statistical analysis. And that should prove telepathy, right? I mean, if that is true, if Rupert Sheldrake has done the actual scientific experiments, that alone should prove that there's some sort of connection between people that we can't explain. So I think the more you look, the evidence is out there. It actually is out there, but you have to actually go and look at it and accept it. And everything I see is they just say, no, he didn't do the experiments correctly. There's no way that could possibly be true. Meanwhile, they won't go and try and replicate it. Mainstream scientists will not try and replicate the telephone experiments. But yeah, I think there's tons of information. There's tons of evidence like that.
Yeah, that's the thing that we discovered, right, Chris? It's like you start to look at where the government has actually applied the science and where the scientists have actually been, and you discover that there's a breadcrumb trail. There's actual places that they've been. There's people that have been there, and there's like patents and science behind that. And then somehow underneath all that, or over that, like an umbrella, is the UAP topic. Like somehow this idea of telepathy and psychic tethering or something somehow occurs within the phenomena, or is a big part of it. It's definitely a part of how it seems like these highly specialized teams are finding and contacting the UAP. We're always looking for like radar and technology and like using scientific devices to go find them. And then we find out from like Jacob Barber and all of his friends out of Delta Force and the Green Beret that they have psionic assets that are just as valuable as using a radar equipment. They're using telepaths to try and find their targets and do stuff like that. So it's all this mixed bag. Suddenly we're analyzing UFO footage from the Air Force and the Navy and the Nimitz incident and the gimbal and all this stuff. But then it's down on the ground. You've got Skinwalker Ranch, Mount Wilson Ranch, and telepathic communication. So how are you stepping through the veil from becoming a fighter pilot into this whole world of mysteries and where the science sort of falls apart? And we could do, and I think we should do, a whole nother interview on this where we talk about your theories on reality and consciousness, like what UFOs are and where they come from and all of that. That's like a whole other video, I think, that we'd need to do. And you're writing books about this too, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. So you've read at least part of that manuscript. It hasn't been easy, I would say, because you were definitely on the consciousness realm, coming as an experiencer. So for you came from that angle, and I think, I came from the other angle, the mainstream science angle. So I didn't want to get into the woo, right? And of course, I have so many people write whenever I'd make a video, looking that direction. They'd be like, "Don't look over there. Don't go into the woo.
You're gonna get lost in there."
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing though. Like it's just back at the academy, when they're like, "Just quit, man. Just quit." Like if you tell me not to do something, it's almost like that's what gets me to do it. Like a reverse engineering. I'm easily reverse engineered, I guess. So I guess the point and what helped being a fighter pilot is that like just coming from that world, I had friends, several friends die, people seriously hurt, and they talk a lot about integrity, right? It's about integrity. Like when you die, what's actually going to matter? It's not going to matter how much money you had. It's going to matter really what is your integrity, what is your personal worth, like what was the point of your whole life, what's the meaning of your life. And it shouldn't come down to I sold out to make more money, or I guess I don't I learned not to be feared of death. I'm not scared of dying at all anymore, I guess, which is kind of ridiculous. I'm scared of not living like a worthwhile, meaningful life. Especially when you have people that have died, they're not have a chance to be here. So what am I going to do? Just screw around and not do something that doesn't matter. So you end up not being. I'm scared of obviously, losing my credibility. I don't like when I get, emails or messages saying like, what are you doing? It's ridiculous. Or what are you looking into? You've lost all your credibility, etc. But at some point I don't care. I'm not afraid to look at something if it's the truth. Like if it's the truth, and that's what ends up being, is that there is this woo, and it's against whatever I thought was true. It doesn't matter. I'm going to look into it. I'm not going to be afraid to look at the woo. That was the thing. There's this big push, like, well, I better not cover that. My audience will get mad, or I'll turn off all these people, or, they'll think less of me. But it just comes from fear, right? And what I realize is it's because I'm scared to cover this, or I'm scared to look into this, or scared to investigate this, that I'm not going to look at it. And that's when I change. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go. It doesn't matter. If it's the woo, if the answer is the woo, then I'll be in the woo. I'll be right in there, get in the woo, swim around with it, get used to it, float on it. And so that's where I ended up, is I'm just going to find out the truth. And if the woo is not the answer, great. But it's like everything we're looking at is the answer. Like Jake Barber comes out. He didn't come out and say that all these other things that people want to believe. He came out and said that, yeah, we use psychic assets, and I communicated with like this goddess, and it was all about love. You know how tough you have to be to come and say that out in public,
Yes, I do, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Like you have to be the guy that is willing to get shot and killed. And like the only reason he's able to do that is because he is such a badass. Like that's the reason he's not afraid, and he doesn't care what you think. And if he's crying online because he is communicated with some goddess and it was all about love, he is a badass enough to say it. And so I don't know, I guess that's what turned around for me. Is
and there's like a confidence that comes from when you just know better. Like as an experiencer, there's something that happens, like a switch that gets flipped or something, where you're just like there's a knowing or a deeper wisdom where you're like, okay, like now that I've experienced that, or now that I kind of grasp this, it's the rest that I have to sort of fit around. Like, how do I make sense of that now? And like, so that's what's been wild, is like with Jake Barber coming out here, we look back over the last 3 or 4 years that we've been actually going to Skinwalker and Mount Wilson and over to Norway. And we've been getting ridiculed and been getting told that we're crazy all this time, because we were doing meditations, we were doing remote viewing and going to these locations, talking about how the UFOs could be coming from underground or from some frequency, or maybe reality doesn't operate under the same physics that we're taught, and all of this stuff. I mean, I've lost a lot of friends. We've got a lot of hate talking about this. And then now fast forward to now, and we're actually working with physicists and scientists and these insiders that are coming out of the program are saying, yeah, like the stuff that we were doing and poking around 3-4 years ago, just trying to make our best guess as part of our citizen effort, our decentralized effort. We were kind of right, Chris. We were kind of right the whole time, right? Like, so I'm curious.
That's what I say behind the scenes. Like, I think all these times I was like, did you see Jake Barber? It's like everything you've been saying. Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I mean, I wasn't. I mean, obviously, I didn't want to, like I mentioned, but I wasn't afraid to say that this is what I think it is, because that really was what it looked like. I believed Mike Herrera. It seemed like the most probable, as crazy as it sounds, it's the most probable answer. So, yeah, I mean, and it's difficult, right? Like you said, you lost friends, you lost probably family over this. Getting ridiculed, losing numbers, losing views, etc., because you're putting what you actually think is true. I think it's been a huge validation for sure to say it was related to consciousness. All the stuff you were saying when I was like, I don't know, Carl, it sounds kind of ridiculous, but man, why does it sound true? Or how could that be possible? Why were they looking into that 50 years ago? Or why is it always the same people that end up on these programs? And like, I mean, even Hal Puthoff came out in the program and said, basically, yes, this is how it works. Like, they don't allow any of the hard science to be released because then you would know. So what is he going to say? And he's 88. Like, what does Hal Puthoff have to gain by going out there and lying about, this? Is he really running the PSYOP for the government still? He's 88 years old. It's like running the PSYOP.
Right.
So as crazy as it sounds, it explains all the experiencer accounts. It explains all the links to consciousness. It explains why the government would hide it. If they're the only ones that know that you can break through a Faraday cage, right? If you can get information past a Faraday cage, that's a pretty big security flaw, right? That would really hurt all of our security measures, right? That we put in, at least in the Air Force. So I think there are huge benefits or reasons for them to keep all this stuff, secret. 100%.
Yep. It's like you were talking about how like it's all about the information and controlling the information, and breaking through that to try and find out what's real and what's not. So, Chris, would you say now, going to these places, swimming in it, opening your mind up, and being like, okay, what is really going on? Would you say that do you consider yourself an experiencer now, or have you actually seen things that you would call supernatural or paranormal or UFOs?
Yeah, I mean, this is a loaded question. I think you know the answer. Yeah, I've had my own experience. I don't know. I'd relate it to more of a Kundalini awakening. That's probably the closest thing I could see that I found online is some crazy, I guess what people would call a spiritual experience. Spiritual awakening. I never thought I would have a spiritual experience.
You said you were a hardcore atheist, right? So this is like coming out of nowhere for you.
Yeah, basically. My underlying worldviews were rocked by the whole UAP investigations. Looking into it, I got really angry actually when I found out, or I believe that I found that science has actually been suppressed. That there's the reason we believe in all these, I call it the dark ages, which would be like dark matter, dark energy, black holes, essentially, all these, it's really the dark ages of science. I think we'll look back on this time and be like, okay, that makes sense. Why we haven't really seen any big breakthroughs at all. Because you can use a technology without understanding how it works. Right. When I went in to learn about like semiconductors, how they work, how computers actually work, it's all just theory. Like how they jump states, how you can actually have discrete things, to where an electron doesn't actually move between here and here. How you can get a 0 or a 1 in a gate in a computer, because it doesn't really pass between. There's only two states there, right? There's only a 0 or a 1. In a semiconductor, or when your normal computer chip, how it works is the gate, it's either a 0 or 1. There's no in between. And so how that works is just theory. Like when you look down and like biochemistry, everything I learned when I got to the really high level advanced science, you learn it's all just really vague, really fluffy, theory, man. Like biochemistry, they have no idea. If you look into serious biochemistry, they have no clue how these processes actually work. It's just so complicated. You think about it. I mean, there's 37 trillion. We don't even know how many cells, but they say 37 trillion cells in a human body. And then, so when they say like they know how these processes work, the electron transport chain, you know, Krebs cycle, all these things, when they say they know how these things work, they don't, man. It's just really just a lot of words and theory, and it happens to line up in this really advanced way. So I think we confuse ourselves into really thinking that we know way more than we actually know about the reality, the natural world, and everything. And so I went from really a stable ground, you know, where I knew like, okay, atheism, materialism, you know, and then when that was pulled out of there, I was just like in free fall, essentially. And so I ended up in some sort of, all I could say is crazy coincidences started happening. I started making all these connections, which shouldn't have been makeable. You know, like if that was true, you know, how can this be true? Essentially, how could all of our science be so suppressed that, you know, I was using advanced AI tools, right? So again, we do have AI. So I do have access to like these really intelligent physics platforms now. Like ChatGPT 4.0 is really good at physics, despite what people will think. Despite what they'll say, like the models get better and better. And so I couldn't make up the physics on my own. You know, I couldn't be like the Einstein, of course not, that just goes and like can pump out formulas on a blackboard, right? But I had enough knowledge to where I could look at the formulas already formulated, right? And I could follow along. So I could read the book. I couldn't write the book, you know, but I could read the book and say, wow, that does make sense. And what about this? And so if it's just me in my basement with an arguably powerful AI tool, but one that costs $20 a month, if I can find these linkages, these coincidences, it should have been found already by our science. And again, if you go and look, I believe it has been found. So I believe they've known about this science. I think they know that there's an ether. I think there's at least elements of the government know that there's an ether, and that we do have connections, and you can actually get information across, you know, time and space. I think they know about this consciousness field or whatever. So I think the science has been suppressed. And so when I had like this, whatever you call it, consciousness experience, spiritual awakening, it was like crazy. Coincidences kept happening. I ended up doing things I would never consider myself doing. Yeah, that's all I can basically explain. It was crazy spiritual experience, but I'm not scared of dying at all. I'm pretty sure we live past. I'm pretty sure what we see here is not all of reality, or even a small slice of it. I think it goes much further than that. And I was very excited to find that out. I'm very optimistic. I'm happy, right? To go from atheist, believing you're just going to die and nothing's going to happen, which doesn't make sense, to now, okay, it's actually the opposite. You know, we actually probably live forever. Yeah, so it was good, I guess. I'm overall very happy it happened, optimistic. It was a painful experience, you know, probably the most painful year of my life. And I think you've had a similar kind of experience. But now that I've come on the other side, I feel just so much more rich. I feel like life is much richer than I thought it could be. And it's much more complex, and it's deeper. And I definitely don't know even a fraction of what I thought I knew before I went into this kind of awakening, if you will. It's more like awakening that I don't know Jack really, and I definitely the rest of the world doesn't know it either.
The awakening to the unknown. I didn't know. That realization. Yeah, it's a wild one for sure. I think it was amazing to kind of see you go through that, and I've gone through a lot of that in my own way too. In kind of closing, I want to get your thoughts. Again, I think we should just do another interview where we could deep dive into this. But Chris, what do you think now that you've been through all this, been to all these places and looked at all the data, and then had your own experience of awakening and seeing reality different. What do you think is going on? Or like, what do you think the UFOs or extraterrestrials are? And what do you think is going on with us in reality? If you could give us just kind of a short, abridged version. I know you've got a whole book that's going to be coming out about a lot of this, but just give everybody a taste.
Yeah. I guess first I'd have to say that, yeah, obviously I'm just one perspective, and I guess I would just give an argument. I don't have definitive proof or anything. But I think what it actually does relate to, as crazy as it sounds, is a spectrum of life, basically a hierarchy of life. So the book I'm writing is called As Above, So Below. And really the argument, and this is an ancient Hermetic principle, right, is that life is essentially a fractal spectrum. So if you look, there's microscopic animals that make up each one of us, right? We're each made up of, already mentioned it, like 37 trillion little cells, right? Little tiny little animals that somehow like form, it's like Transformers or Voltron, into like
Right.
Carl. It's like 37 trillion
Totally.
little Carls formed together into
Voltron, yes.
super Carl. So it's like, yeah, it's like a Voltron or something. But what it is a hierarchy of life, right? And because if you took out each one of those little cells and put them in their own little petri dish, they would live. If you had 37 trillion little petri dishes and split them all out, they would be alive, right? But you would be gone, as far as we understand. Like there would be no Carl anymore. Like Voltron would have been deconstructed, if you will.
Right.
So essentially, it's an emergent property, and it's also it's a scale. So if I just took you, right, and just took you and put you out in the middle of no universe, right, out in your own little petri dish, you wouldn't live, right? You actually need everything around you. You need the earth, the air, the water. You would live for, you need the gravity actually to even hold you together. So you are a part of the earth. You just define yourself as, outside of this little part right here. But is it that little part or is it over here? How far away from your skin is Carl?
Yeah, and when you take into account the seeing, like how far you can see, is that who you are too? Is that a part of you? What you perceive is all within that field too, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. And if we're all, I argue that we're all, it's waves actually. If you look, there's no dual nature to light and matter. I think light is a wave and matter is also a wave. So de Broglie in 1923 basically proved that electrons are a wave. It's actually not a fixed particle. If you Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, right? When they're like, they make it complicated. It sounds complicated, right? You can't get the momentum and the position at the same time, right? So, but really what they're saying is there's not a particle there. It's a wave. That's really, I think, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is a wave is only change, right? You only see something when it changes. That's right. A wave, right? And so that's Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And they make it, again, they make science complicated to say, oh, you can't understand it. It's momentum. You're not getting the momentum vector and the position at the same time. But no, it's because you're trying to measure a wave. Where's the wave? Well, it's moving, right? So you can't measure it. So yeah, if matter is made of waves and light is made of waves, then there's no dual nature to light, and that explains the double slit experiment. Then it gets rid of this whole, they get into all these spooky physics, they make up all these things. Yeah, but if everything's just a wave, then there's no problem. And so what that means is the actual life scales scale up. So just like there's you're made of 37 trillion cells, and just like I can't take you out of this universe, because then you wouldn't exist and the universe also wouldn't exist. I think life actually goes above us as well. So that I think that you and me are part of a larger system. So you've heard of it before, like Gaia. That would be that the Earth is its own living, breathing system. But I think that is what I call macroscopic life. So I think in the past they found microscopic life and it blew their minds. They found it in 1683, right? They could see the little animals with microscopes. But doctors didn't wash their hands for 200 years. right?
Right.
So no one really believed. They ridiculed them. They said they were crazy. And then 200 years, finally, after people were dying, and then they're like, oh, we should wash our hands. And then all of a sudden they wash their hands. But so what those diseases were actually macroscopic effects on us. So basically effects from another dimension that we couldn't see, couldn't imagine was there. But it was. We had microscopic life was affecting our dimension, and it caused all these weird things. And so that's what they attributed, like sickness. They attributed sicknesses to ghosts, right? Or they attribute it to demons. So that we'll attribute things to microscopic life, I think in the same way that we're attributing the phenomenon to actual effects that could be from, I believe, another dimension, which could be a larger dimension, meaning higher dimensions. So that's where, and this is also, I think it explains a lot of the reasons why we deal with a lot of the crazy things we deal with is like we just take for granted that we live in this nation, right? You're just like, I want to be a part of something bigger than myself, or we even call it organizations. I think we just take it totally for granted that we actually are part of larger living systems, like literally living, breathing, killing systems. And I think that's where the nations are. I think they are actually macroscopic life. And so there's reasons they don't tell us, right? There's reasons you don't tell your intestinal cells that they're a part of you, right? That they're going to die in 3 days, while your neurons are going to live forever. There's no benefit to them having that information. And so that the information doesn't need to get to that level. Like that dimensional level does not need to know about our dimensional level, right? I don't want them doing things I don't want them to do, right? I want the Chris, to drink the coffee. I don't want to, go to grab some water,
Right.
but my hand doesn't work, because they're like, you don't need water right now. So I think it explains a lot of these reasons why they don't tell us about new physics. They don't tell us about other entities that they're probably engaging with. Because if nations are living, breathing organisms, then chances are alien life is probably not our size. Or if it is our size, it's going to be a different makeup. It's not going to be human meets, that's the way we think of it. Like when man meets, Zorkon or whatever,
Right.
No, it's going to be Earth life meets whatever, Zeta Reticuli. It's going to be those.
Or we might even, like when we're looking at like microbial life and it perceives to us like we perceive it as another dimension until we have the technology to be able to actually look at it and analyze it. Yeah. These beings we would call like angels or demons, or misidentify them and label them all kinds of different things until we can actually tell what they are, because they might not even be the same physical dimension as us. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Yeah. So I think think about you, right? If you find something new in the world, you go and you pick up a jellyfish, right? How do you actually identify that jellyfish? Initially it's going to be the little cells in your fingers actually feeling the jellyfish, right? And it'll be the cells in your eyeballs actually observing the jellyfish, right? And then all that information will go to the neurons in your brain, right? But your intestinal cells, they don't know jack, right? They don't know what's going on. Like you didn't eat the jellyfish at that point. So I think the same thing could be going on. Like the nation state of America has interacted with whatever it is we're interacting with. Some other life form, I believe, is another entity at a different dimension. And I believe that interaction happened. The nation state of America probably learned about that back in the 40s when they actually came, when they started dropping nuclear bombs and started, exploding things at that level. I think they interacted with this other entity, which is a non-human intelligence.
Right.
So I think what we're seeing from our dimensional scale is the non-human intelligence that is the nations or whatever organization is up at that level. actually interacting. It's picking up the jellyfish and being like, what is this thing? Right. But
Right.
how does that look to us? It looks to us like weird science interactions, military interactions on the coasts, not knowing what these materials are, right? They don't know. They don't even know how to interact with it. They say it could be alive or it could be dead. Like a lot of the entities they're saying, like David Grush said, is they call it biologic entities. But he says also we don't know if it's ever been alive. So it's almost like from a different dimension, they'll create these little machines as if you made a little like a little ant. You know, you're trying to like communicate with ants. And so you're like, okay, I'm going to make a little microscopic ant, you know, and I'm going to send it down there and I'm going to drive them around, you know, and have them like, well, we see them shake their thorax or whatever, you know, this is how the ants talk down there. So that's what we're going to have is I'm going to have my little animatronic dude walk around and interact with these humans, you know? And again, it's always through like telepathic means. They're not talking. None of these entities are talking.
Right.
So I don't know. That's why I'm very interested in it because I've leaned that way just from the scientific perspective and found, okay, what if microscopic life is a reality? Chances are macroscopic life is also a reality. And then I've just applied that. If that's true, then how would that interact with humanity? Could it look like the phenomenon, or would it appear like the phenomenon? So. That's the best thing that I've come up with is that it's some sort of interdimensional interaction. And overlay all of this with, we don't know what reality is. We don't know what consciousness is. We don't know what life is. So it could be a mix of all of that stuff.
Fascinating. So it's like, even when you're just like, even asleep at night or driving in your car somewhere, the mitochondria in your body are doing their own thing. Almost like they have their own intelligence and their own programming, or they're following a frequency.
They have separate DNA. Your mitochondria have separate DNA.
Separate DNA, right? Like the mitochondria.
Only
like
from your mother. Only from your mother.
Right. And these are like almost like DNA they're finding is almost more like an antenna. It's like a frequency resonator. And so how does the mitochondria in your body know what your brain needs or what your body needs or what the other organs need? It's not like each individual mitochondria is going up to the brain to pick up its memo to know what to do and then goes back down. There's some sort of a quantum electric waveform that's going throughout the body that's even at a subconscious level to where you don't even have to think about it. I don't even have to think about my mitochondria. I can be sleeping or taking a nap and it does its own thing on some kind of just like going on the flow of the Schumann resonance or something. And then when you realize, oh, my body, my function, and all of this stuff is a part of the whole, or a part of my environment that's operating as a part of all this. And that's interconnected in that waveform throughout like the whole universe and maybe into these other dimensions. And that leaves plenty of room for other entities. So you're saying these UAP could just be like cosmic white blood cells or mitochondria coming from some other dimension, just like we would have looked at microbes a few hundred years ago and not understood them.
Exactly. 100%. Yeah. In Jacques Vallée, I didn't even know this when I originally came up with this initial concept. I thought of it, it looked like a control system. It's basically like a control system in your body. You mentioned white blood cells. Is basically it's nature, right? Nature is essentially control systems at different levels. You know, look at any ecosystem, it's going to be interrelated. You're going to have, if you get too many wolves, right? Basically, they're going to eat all the prey animals, and then now there's not going to be enough food for the wolves, so then the wolves are going to die. You know, that's essentially a control system. It's a balancing system. You know, the wolves keep the prey animals in correct numbers, right? They keep them in check. So that is a control system. Same as the white blood cells you mentioned. So if we are an integral part of the environment, right, of the actual greater ecosystem, which I don't think we're just alone. Like if you look, nature goes all the way down to the literal atomic level down to DNA is the size of atoms, like you mentioned. It goes, you look at every level of size all the way up to us, and there's organization, there's control systems. And then if you look above us, there's also organization, control systems, right? We think we're the top always of the food chain, right? We're always the center. We're always the big dog. If we meet aliens, it will be a human, talking to a gray or a Zorgon or whatever, but that's all about us. It's all about the human thing. But if you look around, you wake up and you go to work. Why? To feed the system. That's why you work. Like, why did you go to school? It wasn't because you're like, you know what? I really want to go to school. Really want to learn something.
Right.
No, you went to school so that you could do what? Become a certain entity in a larger system, right? In a larger control system, which I argue is a living organism, just like any other organism on the planet. So as long as we're not an isolated, alone entity in the universe, which I really don't think we are, I think it just continues up. Just remove us as the biggest thing, the most important thing in the universe, and all of a sudden you say, okay, we're just a part of everything else. So yeah, I think it goes up higher. So if we are integrated with other things above us, around us, chances are we're surrounded by other planets. I think there's literally billions of other planets, not exactly like ours, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're very similar, actually. And there's actually reasons that we're not interacting. There are barriers. There's reasons that the cells in your body don't communicate directly, or they don't know that the neurons are there, because it doesn't help the system, right? It does not help it doesn't keep everything in check. It doesn't maintain the system continuing.
Yeah, you'd have a total shutdown, right? If you had to pay attention to all of the details, you wouldn't be able to function. Like Alan Watts, the philosopher, says, like, if you were a centipede and you had to try and count every step or think about every step, you would just curl up and die. You couldn't do it, right?
It wouldn't work. Yeah, and that's where I think those are the dimensions. Like, you can see the different dimensions right there. Its size. A mitochondria lives in another dimension. Like, if you were the same size as a mitochondria, it would blow your freaking mind, right? It would scare you seeing a mitochondria in like human size. It'd be terrifying.
Right.
They're in a different dimension. They are 100%, and they're part of you. Literally, they're. That alone is just a crazy, creepy a thought, right? There's 37 trillion little cells inside of you, and if you saw one full size, same size as you, it would be terrifying, right? It'd be probably scarier than a normal horror movie.
It might appear like some kind of a UAP giant thing in the sky that had some quantum energy around it that we couldn't understand, anti-gravity hovering. Like, how would you know the difference, like, from our scale? Like, if our planet in our solar system, when you zoom out far enough, just becomes like another atom or another cell again, then all of that is just a spectrum. Like you said, it's just a spectrum of a whole waveform. And man, I think we could talk for like another 2 hours, and we should do more interviews like this and everything. But I know that you've got other stuff coming up this evening for you over there. So we'll wrap this one up. But I just want to, you've done some amazing interviews, like your one with Michael Herrera, some of these interviews that you've had, just mind-blowing, awesome guests. And so everybody needs to go over and check out Lehto Files. Go check out Chris Lehto's podcast and his show. And what do you have coming up? Do you have any cool guests coming up that you've got planned on?
I'm talking with Jay King tomorrow. I don't know if you've ever interviewed him.
Jay Christopher King?
Yeah.
Okay. So so I was in Florida. I flew out there to do a podcast with Mike Busey, and we were sitting in his living room, and the episode came on where he talks about his childhood abduction experience. And he recounts how one of the entities was floating in the air and was like holding a wand in its hand. And when I saw that, I literally jumped up off the couch. I was like, holy shit. I was like, no way. Because one of my childhood abduction experiences has totally had an entity that was holding like a wand in its hand. And so, yeah, that'll be really fascinating conversation.
Okay, he's one of the, because I know you shared that with me before. I didn't know he was one of the guys.
Yeah, he was the same age, saw the same thing. Like, I think he saw 2 entities and I saw 3, very similar. That was one of those where I was like, holy crap, like such a fascinating story. So you're interviewing him tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow. So I'll
Cool.
definitely, I'll think of that for sure.
Well, awesome. We'll share the links out. Well, Chris, thanks for your time and your stories. And we definitely need to have you back. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. I'll be happy to be back, Carl. Thanks, man.